Louise, good morning to you.
Morning, lads.
The news came through yesterday, confirmation that Johnny Sexton won't make the game this week. He's not going to be considered for selection, which means essentially Ross Byrne starts the game. What is the difference and what's the step down at this point in their respective careers in terms of what Ross Byrne can achieve for Leinster this weekend versus what maybe Johnny Sexton would have been able to?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Ger, and actually thinking about it, I think Johnny Sexton, it could be a controversial statement, but I think Johnny Sexton is more important to Ireland than he is to Leinster, or his influences, or his absence is felt more for Ireland than it is for Leinster. So I don't think it's as big of a deal should Johnny Sexton have been stood down for a match of this magnitude that involved the Irish team. I think Ross Byrne, this is his 100th appearance. He's in line to make for Leinster this weekend. He's very comfortable in the blue shirt, and he's had big game experience for them. And to be honest, I think he'd be in a better position knowing he's starting the game now, midweek on, rather than coming on 2 tries down against Exeter, like he did in the quarterfinals. So I actually think this probably isn't as big of a deal as it would have been, for example, if it was in a green shirt. I mean, even up to was last year, the year before, that Leinster started Ross Byrne optionally against Munster in a Pro 14 semi-finals. So they're much closer in this in the blue shirt. It just seems to be at that international standard that we haven't seen Ross Byrne excel, or we haven't seen him maybe get enough of an opportunity. But certainly where Johnny Sexton at that incredible frenetic pace and that intensity, that his qualities far outweigh the next 10, be it Ross Byrne or whoever it is. But in that very slightly lower standards that we see in European Cup rugby, Ross Byrne has more than delivered for Leinster in the past, and none more so than in the quarter-final.
Yeah, I think Ross Byrne's been unbelievably unlucky in terms of the timing that he's had with Ireland. If you think back to his World Cup rehearsal or audition was when we got absolutely annihilated in Twickenham, where the whole team was getting battered physically up front, and it's like, what's he supposed to do in that situation? That's he ends up carrying the can for that and not making the World Cup squad. But if he'd played against Japan, in that second half, would he have just kicked to the corners and maybe played a bit of possession and a bit of territory and been a bit calmer and maybe made his kicks, because we know he can make his kicks? I think it's potentially would have. And if it had been him instead of Burns with the ball in his hand against Wales, would that kick have found the corner? I think it probably would have found the corner. And we're talking about this guy as Ireland's, suddenly Joey Carberry has somebody really pushing him. So I really feel like it must be a huge career opportunity for him this weekend to go, hang on a second here, you've all completely underrated my talents and my skills. Look at what I've done in key moments against Munster. I was talking about this earlier on at Christmas. Comes off the bench, beautiful pass that kind of gets underrated a little bit. Repeats the beautiful pass at the weekend against Exeter, and you're like, hang on a second, it's not a fluke. This guy's and he's got vision, he's got tactical awareness, his kicking is good. We have maybe been a little bit asleep on how good he is.
Yeah, he's incredibly accurate, and he has delivered time and time again for Leinster. And I agree with you, that pass that Hugo Keenan picked up and offloaded to Larmer that you're referring to down at Thomond Park, that was incredible. And also I agree that game against England, I remember in the run-up to it thinking, okay, he's got the player in possession of the jersey, has got the nudge in terms of selection coming up to that game in Twickenham in August before the World Cup. But then, you're absolutely obliterated up front, and all of a sudden the 10 is dropped the pecking order down to number 4. So he has suffered a little bit there. But there is also, I suppose, there are some players in all sports, be it in rugby, in GA, wherever, and they find a real comfort level, and when they jump up a level, they just haven't found that real level of comfort. And we can say that maybe at Ross Byrne, he's an excellent club player. He's delivered time and time again. I've no fear of him this weekend. And if you're a Leinster supporter, I think they have a lot of faith in him as well, as does Leo Cullen and the squad. He has a huge amount of familiarity with the players around him. And then the other thing is, let's look who's outside of him, and inside. So Luke McGrath, likely going to captain the squad. He's just been so consistent and just continuously asking questions of why he isn't involved in an Irish squad or an Irish Six Nations setup extended squad. Robbie Henshaw and Hugo Keenan are both nominated for European Player of the Year, such as their form, and they'll take a lot of you'd like to think they take a lot of the decision making and pressure off of Ross, because they're going to hopefully be feeding in a lot of information from the outside of the opportunities that are available. Great to see Gary Ringrose is one of the few, I suppose, highlights of our positive signs out of their game against Munster at the weekend, is that James Ryan and Gary Ringrose got 60 minutes under their belt. So I'd expect to see them this weekend. Aidan Larmer, his 2 finishes against Exeter, and James Lowe, and that's an incredibly formidable backline. And it's one that Ross would be very used to playing in and very comfortable in as well. So I don't think this is as big of a calamity, Johnny Sexton being ruled out, as it would have been, as I said earlier, if it was in the Irish shirt.
Is there a style factor to that as well, Louise? Do Leinster play the game differently that allows Ross Byrne to have more of an impact?
Yeah, I think, look, he is kind of known to be more of a kind of a tactical, using his boot a bit more. And I think certainly with Ireland, we're kind of changing what we're trying to do a little bit. We're trying to get a bit more decision making at the backs, trying to play a little bit wider once we obviously get our foothold in territory and get our foothold into the game. But I think with Leinster, it's a lot of it is played up front, and it's a bit more of a traditional 10 controlling the game, and then our strike plays as well. So maybe that does suit Ross a bit more. That, and just the general familiarity of, I think, the players around you and the systems, whatever those systems would be, once you know them and you feel comfortable in them, then you're going to, I suppose, exert your influence on the game a lot more. It's if you're coming into, like, particularly for a 10 position, if you're coming into the game, for example, against Ireland, whether it be as a sub or the odd opportunity he's got to start, he always knows he's coming in fighting for his place, not only within the 23, but within the squad at all. Whereas at Leinster, he probably has a lot more knowledge and confidence about where he lies within Leo Cullen's plans, and that just gives you a little bit more freedom to play, that you're not worried about how you're going to be maybe analysed after the game. Anyone who has that level of confidence, you're going to be a lot more confident coming into the game.
It's still a little bit up in the air about whether or not we are going to have this 3-test series in Fiji. We've heard that it was off, we've heard that it was back on, we've heard that it's more likely than happening now than not. And if it does happen, obviously Ireland are going to bring as many players as they can to get as much of a look at who they can in those situations. You'd assume at this point that Ross Byrne is on the plane, but there's been times when he hasn't been in, and he's definitely on the plane, right?
Yeah, well, he can say a lot about that himself after his performance on Sunday, so he can certainly put that to bed. I think if he puts in, a 7 out of 10 or an upwards performance this weekend for Leinster, then he has to be on that plane, particularly what he did in that pressure situation coming off the bench against Exeter.
One last point on this. Owen was making the point earlier on that it's completely ridiculous for Chelsea to be painted as an underdog given all the money that they've spent, and it would be completely ridiculous to paint Leinster in any way as an underdog. But they have some players in that team who are chippy about their exclusion from the Ireland squad in particular. There is Ruddock in the back row, there is the 9 who's captain in the team, and then there's going to be the 10 as well. Key positions, key players who are like, look at me, look at what I can bring to your team, why am I not in your team? Which you kind of need when a team is in the success cycle that Leinster are at the moment.
Yeah, well, certainly what you need is a lot of leadership in the players that aren't going off to international camp, because they're the guys that keep that culture, keep the standards so high, as well as maybe your non-internationals over the years. Someone like Scott Fardy would have been very important for that role as well. He obviously wasn't heading off into international camps. So those guys their standards are just as high, their quality is just as high, but for whatever reason, they're down the depth chart in international camp. They can often be the guys that are really driving the competitiveness because they're fighting for any inch and any scrap. What's important for, I suppose, Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster is the ultimate goal is that they're Leinster players, and that whatever they do, they're not trying to stand out individually just to be to stand out to Andy Farrell, that they're doing it to the best of to what Leinster need. So that's really important with the culture within the squad. And usually if someone is doing what's best for their team and they have that level of standard and execution and they're doing it consistently, then you'd imagine they are pulled up into international camp. But look, we have some serious depth amongst some of the positions within the international squad, particularly at back row. I think at 9, all right, Luke McGrath could probably feel a little bit peeved because he's just been so consistent for Leinster. I think maybe last year, I think it was against Saracens, he just had a bit of an off game, and maybe he's a little bit judged on that. Plus the idea of giving youth its chance. So for the likes of Craig Casey, I mean, we're all excited to see him come through, and we always lament the fact that in Ireland we don't seem to push our 21-year-olds or exciting players as much as they do, for example, in France. So, we're trying to, we're always, you'll never keep everyone happy. You have and I won't even say the Munster fraternity, but you have the thought process of you want to push the younger people through that. Maybe, like you could say, Craig Casey is below Luke McGrath, but what's the potential that Craig Casey has over Luke McGrath versus we probably know what Luke can give, and he's very consistent with that. But at the same time, he can be pretty peeved because of the performances he is putting in as well. And it is quite likely going to drive them even further this weekend. The likes of Rhys Ruddock, who again didn't put much of a foot wrong in the Six Nations when he was called upon. I think that French game particularly, he was an incredibly strong driving force with ball in hand and defensively. And yet he ends up a bit frozen out for no particular reason when it comes to the end of the Six Nations. So it is a difficult conversation for Andy Farrell to have these players, but you can imagine Leo Cullen, Stuart Lancaster, they're trying to harness that competitiveness and that edge for Leinster's game.
We are now going to be missing the Ronald O'Gara versus Johnny Sexton narrative going into this game. I guess we do have O'Gara versus Contepomi if you wanted to reach for that one. But like, you're a French team at home, you see that one of the best out halves in the world isn't playing. That should really light a fire under them, and that should make this more of a contest, or it should make it a massive contest psychologically from the standpoint of La Rochelle at least.
Yeah, and I think another thing is when teams play against Johnny Sexton, they obviously like to target him a lot, and I don't think that's anything we haven't noticed in the past. So will they target Ross Byrne as much, or will they focus their attentions a little bit further at the line? Does it change defensively what La Rochelle would have done if Johnny was playing from a defensive viewpoint? Or would they decide, no, we're actually really going to go after Ross Byrne, we're going to see, is he really up for it? Does he have the mettle to withstand the pressure that we want to impose? I think it was really interesting actually listening. Obviously, Raj is a big contributor to Off the Ball, and listening to him speaking about kind of that culture within La Rochelle, like not too long ago, applying their trade in Division 2 in France and working their way up. And he spoke about kind of culture and trying to get across what the European Cup means to a team that's mixed with French, Fijian, South African, Australian, Kiwi players, because it's huge that they want to fight for each other in this sort of environment. Because obviously, I suppose we take it for granted in Ireland. Like, I know certainly the European Cup was when I was a kid, was one of the first reasons I started tuning into rugby so much, was that the intensity, the colour, the passion, and obviously Munster were kind of driving it from the Irish point of view at that stage. But trying to get across to his La Rochelle players who would have been focusing so much on working their way up through the ranks in the top 14, like coming into their first Heineken Cup or European Cup semi-final, what's that going to mean to them, and what's going to cause their players to fight for that extra inch? And again, that's where he seems like such an exciting coach that you want to play for, because even to recognise this and to be able to somehow harness it in a team of not mercenaries, but different nationalities come together who didn't dream of winning a Heineken or European Cup growing up. So it'll be interesting how La Rochelle do approach this game, obviously with one eye still on the top 14 as well.
O'Gara's obviously signed a 3-year deal, so we shouldn't talk about his future or what his future plans are, but that's exactly what we're going to do. Gordon Darcy this morning in the Irish Times, just why would O'Gara want to coach Munster? He says, I think we need to face up to the reality, we may need to face up to the reality that Rog might never come back. It's a valid question, Louise, isn't it, that there's probably a few easier jobs or more straightforward jobs with a way in and a way out than Munster Rugby at this current point anyway.
Yeah, look, none of us can really know what Roger's intentions are, and there might be that romantic notion in him, like he was a one-man club as a player. I do find it hard to think that he wouldn't be intrigued by returning to coach Munster, and I'm sure if that opportunity was ever put on the table to him, it would certainly be largely considered. But as well, again, listening to him speaking off the ball about, like, it's not just a decision for him. He has 5 kids who've largely, a lot of them have spent a lot of their life now in France or even in travelling around the world when he was with the Crusaders as well. So it's not just a decision for him. At the moment, though, when you see what Munster are building, and look, last weekend, I know it was a second/third string Leinster squad, but getting that win was hugely important to Munster and to Joan Van Gran. So I think Munster do need to focus on, and they are, I'm sure, focusing on what they have at the moment and what they're trying to build. But beyond this 3-year contract, we can't really see what's going to be on the horizon. But I think Roger 100% consider any decision that's offered on the table to him from any club or any, I suppose, international franchise. But if it's Munster and if it's Ireland, he'll consider it even more so.
We need to talk about the Six Nations with Stacey Flood on the show during the week, and obviously a big tournament from her perspective because she ends up as our starting 10 in the final game, and that whole kind of grey area of the relationship between the 7s and the 15s has kind of come into a bit of sharp relief over the course of the tournament as well. So we have some professional players who are playing 7s, and it's clear that they've had a big impact on the 15 side. Do you think we've got a better understanding of how the relationship works between those two setups as a result of what's happened over COVID and the way the tournament has been structured, or was that just a happy coincidence that we were able to call on those players for this tournament, Louise? And having looked at it now, what's your preferred methodology for the game to progress with the two setups?
Yeah, and it's not a straightforward answer either, Ger. I suppose 100% the girls strengthened the squad, and you can see that by they obviously came in, maybe the likes of Stacey, I think Lee was 24th player in that first game, ended up on the bench, ended up coming on, making good impacts, ended up starting the last game. And I think if we were, playing the traditional structure and they were going to have a fourth and a fifth game, we'd have seen them continue in that vein of form. Also, the likes of Emily Lane, obviously Dorothy Wall is primarily 7's contracted player as well, but has used a lot of those skills to pay. They've a lot of them have paid off really well in the Six Nations. It's difficult because there has been pretty much no 7s tournaments at the moment, and with the 7 squads not qualifying, with the female squad not qualifying for the Olympics, there has been a shift in focus where for once, okay, you can actually fully focus on 15s if Adam Griggs wants to have a look at you. But down the line, next year, the year after, that availability of the 7 squad to the 15 squad is probably not going to be there, certainly not to that extent. So for that group of players, have they gotten enough of a foundation now that they can dip in and out? Because again, France do this. I mean, for example, 4 of the French players in the 23-3 that started and 1 that came off the bench, Ménager, who then started the final game against England. They came back from 2 weeks in Dubai and straight away came into the squad against Ireland. But they have been able to marry this successfully over the last few years, whereas we've kind of struggled with it. I think a lot of their players would have a natural 15s background that play 7s, whereas ours don't. So although the skill level is there, the athleticism is there, the fitness is more than there, it's about that tactical awareness that our 7s players probably don't have as much of because we haven't played enough 15s club games, not a mind, international level. So it's really not a straightforward answer. It really depends on the availability. But I think we can certainly see how we don't have as big of a player pool in Ireland. And if you have a lot of the talent diverted towards the 7 squad, we have to try and harness that in some way, shape or form in order to make the 15s squad team more successful. But it's not a case of just, I think in our situation compared to France, just launching players back in the week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks before a game. I think it has to be more integrated. But then if you're a contracted 7s player and you're paid to play 7s, then, a 7s coach may not, you're probably a high enough level player in the 7 squad that the 7s coach doesn't necessarily want to offload you to 15s where you pick up an injury and then you're unavailable for 7. So you can see there's a lot of interplay here. At the moment, it's worked out well, but I think it is a coincidence because we haven't had any 7s tournaments, and you'd hope post-COVID that's going to get back up and running again.
Yeah, for sure. Louise, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Louise Galvin, give me some thoughts there on the big stories in rugby this week. We'd love to hear from you. 087 918 180 is the WhatsApp number.